The morning unfolded slowly over the dry riverbed, the light pale and hesitant, settling over stones bleached by months without rain. Heat already lingered in the air, rising in thin, wavering lines from the sand. In the shallow curve where water once pooled, a young male lion lay stretched on his side, his tawny coat dulled by dust and sweat. His ribs lifted and fell in shallow, uneven movements, each breath arriving with effort, as if pulled from somewhere deep and fragile. One foreleg rested at an unnatural angle, the paw half-curled, claws barely visible. His tail lay still behind him, the tuft matted and darkened. Insects drifted close and lifted again, sensing weakness. The lion's ears twitched only faintly, responding more out of habit than awareness. His eyes remained half-closed, clouded by fatigue and dehydration, reflecting little of the wide sky above. It was the kind of stillness that did not belong in open land, where even resting animals carried tension in their muscles, ready to rise and flee. From the line of sparse acacia trees, a ranger stood quietly, binoculars resting against his chest. He had been walking his usual patrol when the absence of movement caught his attention, a gap in the rhythm of the landscape. At first, he thought the lion was simply resting in the shade of the riverbank's curve, conserving energy. But minutes passed and nothing changed. No shift of position. No alert lift of the head. Only the faint, uneven rise of a struggling chest. The ranger lowered himself slowly to one knee, careful not to disturb the gravel beneath his boots. He watched the animal's flanks, counting the breaths, noting the long pauses between them. Sunlight revealed faint scratches along the lion's shoulder, old and new layered together, and a darkened patch near the hind leg where fur clumped unnaturally. Dehydration showed in the tight skin around the muzzle and the cracked edges of the nose. When a light breeze stirred the grass, the lion did not respond. Only one ear flicked weakly, as though reacting from memory rather than intent. The ranger spoke softly without raising his voice, letting the words dissolve into the open air. "Easy, stay still," he murmured, more for himself than for the animal. He shifted his weight inch by inch, keeping distance, respecting the fragile boundary between help and intrusion. The lion's eyelids lifted for a moment, revealing dull amber eyes that struggled to focus. They met the ranger's silhouette briefly, then drifted away, unable to hold. A low, barely audible sound escaped his throat, not a roar or a warning, but a thin vibration of breath and strain. The ranger felt it in his chest, the quiet signal of an animal that had exhausted every reserve. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice barely more than wind. Around them, the savanna continued its ordinary movements. Distant birds calling, grass whispering, heat pressing down. But within that vastness, a small fragile space had formed, shaped by slow breathing, patient watching, and the delicate hope that still lingered in the narrow rise and fall of a young lion's chest. The following mornings arrived with the same pale light and quiet heat, unfolding gently over the dry riverbed as if nothing had changed. Yet something subtle had shifted. Each day before the sun fully claimed the land, the ranger returned along the same narrow path through the grass, his footsteps measured, his presence careful and unannounced. He carried a small metal container in one hand, its surface warm even in the early hours. He never walked directly toward the lion. Instead, he stopped at a respectful distance and placed the water on the ground, letting it rest between stones and dust, close enough to be found, far enough to avoid pressure. The lion remained in nearly the same position, his body still thin and slack against the earth, but small signs of life began to surface in quiet intervals. His breathing, though still uneven, gained a faint rhythm. Some mornings, when the ranger settled into his place beneath the acacia shade, the lion's ears shifted slightly in his direction. Other days, a slow flick of the tail brushed weakly against the sand, leaving a thin, curved mark behind. His eyes opened more often now, lingering half-aware on movement and light, following the outline of the distant figure without urgency or fear. The cracked edges of his nose darkened slightly as he managed to lap a few mouthfuls of water during the night, guided more by instinct than strength. His tongue moved slowly, carefully, as though every motion had to be weighed before it was given. The ranger never hurried. He sat quietly for long stretches, sometimes for hours, watching the wind move through grass and listening to insects gather and scatter. He observed the way the lion's chest rose a little higher than before, the way his shoulders tensed faintly when birds passed overhead. Each sign, no matter how small, was taken seriously. Once, when the lion shifted his foreleg by only a few inches, the ranger felt a quiet tightening in his throat. Progress here arrived in fragments, measured in breaths and subtle turns of the head. On one morning, when the lion struggled forward just enough to bring his muzzle closer to the water, the ranger whispered softly, "That's it, take your time." His voice faded quickly into the open air, leaving no demand behind. Trust did not appear as a sudden change. It grew invisibly, shaped by repetition and restraint. The lion began to expect the distant figure at dawn, the still silhouette against the pale horizon. His gaze no longer drifted away immediately. Sometimes it lingered, studying without tension. His tail moved more often now, not in strength but in recognition, tracing slow arcs in the dust. Flies settled on his coat and lifted again as he twitched faintly, regaining small pieces of control over his body. The ranger responded only by remaining where he was, neither advancing nor retreating, allowing the space between them to stay intact. Day by day, the dry riverbed held their quiet exchange. Water was placed. Breathing was counted. Distance was honored. No hands reached out. No ropes were prepared. Only patience moved between them, carried by sunlight, by stillness, by the steady rhythm of returning footsteps. And in that fragile space, formed by silence and time, a young lion slowly learned that the figure on the horizon meant no harm, only presence, waiting as gently as the wind moving through the grass. The change did not arrive suddenly. It revealed itself in small, worrying signs that gathered quietly over several mornings. The lion's breathing grew heavier again, each rise of his chest accompanied by a faint tremor. The darkened patch near his hind leg widened, the fur stiff and matted, carrying the dull sheen of infection. Flies lingered longer now, settling in clusters before being slowly brushed away by a weakening tail. Some mornings he did not reach the water at all. It remained untouched beside the stones, warming under the sun. His eyes, once beginning to clear, dulled again, drifting in and out of awareness. The fragile balance that patience had built began to tilt. The ranger noticed immediately. He stood longer than usual that morning, binoculars pressed gently to his face, studying every shallow breath, every small shift of weight. He did not speak. He did not move closer. But when he finally turned away, his steps were firm with decision. By midday, a small rescue team returned with him, moving slowly across the open ground, their voices low, their equipment minimal. No vehicles approached the riverbed. Everything was carried by hand. Their presence was deliberate, shaped to disturb as little as possible. They stopped far from the lion at first, allowing him time to register the change in the landscape. His ears lifted weakly. His head rose only a few inches before settling back down. A low sound vibrated faintly in his chest, more exhaustion than warning. The ranger knelt where he always had, letting the animal see the familiar shape among the new ones. "It's okay," he murmured, barely above a breath. The team waited. Minutes passed. Wind crossed the sand. Birds lifted and disappeared into the sky. The lion did not attempt to stand. When they finally moved closer, it was in slow, careful steps, spreading out slightly, keeping their bodies low and non-threatening. A veterinarian prepared a mild sedative, measuring it precisely, knowing the margin was narrow. The ranger remained in front, within the line of the lion's fading focus. The animal's eyes followed him weakly, blinking against dust and light. His muscles tightened briefly as hands approached, a reflex born of instinct, but there was no surge of escape, no gathering of strength. His body no longer held that possibility. The sedative took effect gently. The lion's breathing softened, slowing into a fragile rhythm. As the team cleaned the wound, the extent of the damage became clear. Torn skin, swelling, infection spreading beneath the surface. Their movements were slow and practiced, each touch deliberate, respectful. The ranger rested his hand lightly against the ground near the lion's shoulder, never on him, maintaining presence without pressure. "You're safe," he whispered once, the words carried away almost immediately by heat. Through it all, the lion remained still. Not from weakness alone, but from something quieter. His eyes stayed half open, unfocused, yet aware. His tail did not thrash. His body did not resist. In that stillness, there was an unspoken yielding, a moment where fear gave way to exhaustion and trust. It was not submission. It was survival choosing to accept help. When the treatment ended, the team withdrew as carefully as they had arrived, leaving the lion resting beneath the open sky. The ranger lingered a moment longer, watching the slow rise and fall of the healed, bandaged flank. Around them, the riverbed remained dry and silent, holding the weight of what had passed as sunlight continued its steady journey across the waiting land. The weeks unfolded quietly, marked by gradual shifts that could only be noticed by those who watched closely. Strength returned to the lion in fragments, stitched together by time, care, and steady nourishment. His breathing settled into an even rhythm. The swelling near his hind leg receded, leaving behind a faint scar hidden beneath regrown fur. Each morning he rose a little higher on his forelegs. Each evening he held himself upright a little longer before resting. The hollow curve of his ribs softened as muscle slowly rebuilt itself beneath his coat. His movements, once tentative and delayed, grew more certain, guided again by instinct rather than survival alone. The ranger continued his visits, though they became less frequent. Distance was restored gradually, just as it had been narrowed. Water was placed farther away. Observation returned to binoculars and shade. The lion began to wander beyond the riverbed, first only a few steps, then farther into the open grass. He followed faint scent trails, paused to listen to distant herds, lifted his head toward calls carried on evening wind. Sometimes he disappeared for hours, returning only to rest beneath familiar stones. Other days he did not return at all, and the ranger accepted those absences as signs of recovery rather than loss. By late season, the plains had begun to soften with sparse new growth. Thin green threads pushed through dust, catching early light. On one quiet evening, as the sun slipped low and painted the land in muted gold, the ranger sat alone near the acacia trees, completing his final patrol of the day. The air cooled gently around him. Insects gathered and dispersed. Somewhere far off, a herd shifted, their movement barely audible. He noticed the lion first as a shape moving through tall grass, slow and unhurried. There was no collapse in his stride now, no dragging limb. His shoulders rolled with renewed strength, his head held level. He walked openly, without concealment, without urgency, approaching along a natural line of terrain. When he emerged into clear view, the fading light traced the outline of his body, catching the faint scar along his flank like a quiet signature of memory. The ranger did not move. He remained seated, hands resting loosely on his knees, his breathing calm. The distance between them narrowed without intention, guided only by shared awareness. The lion stopped several paces away. His tail swayed once, slowly. His ears remained neutral, neither flattened nor alert. His eyes met the ranger's briefly, steady and unclouded. There was no challenge in them. No fear. Only recognition shaped by weeks of silent coexistence. For a long moment, neither shifted. Wind passed through grass. Dust drifted and settled. Somewhere, a bird called and fell quiet. The ranger whispered softly, "Good to see you," the words barely leaving his lips. The lion blinked once, then turned his head toward the open plains. Without hesitation, he continued forward, moving past and beyond, merging again with the vastness that had shaped him. As he walked away, his silhouette stretched across the glowing ground, growing thinner as light faded. The sky deepened into muted blues and amber. Grass bent gently beneath evening air. And in that soft convergence of wind, shadow, and distance, a young lion carried his strength back into the living world, leaving behind only quiet memory and the slow breathing of land settling into night. The transition back into belonging happened without ceremony. It unfolded through scent, sound, and distance, guided by instincts older than memory. In the days that followed his quiet departure, the lion moved farther into the plains, following faint traces left by others of his kind. His pace was steady now. His body carried weight and balance again. At dawn and dusk, he paused to listen, lifting his head toward distant calls carried on cool air. Sometimes he answered with a low, restrained sound, not loud enough to challenge, only enough to announce presence. Gradually those calls grew closer. Shapes appeared on the horizon. Shadows gathered and separated. A pride received him without conflict, without celebration, through simple proximity and shared movement. He walked among them as though he had never been absent. From a distance, he blended easily into the rhythm of their lives. He followed during early hunts, remaining cautious at first, learning again the timing of pursuit and retreat. He rested in shade beside others, bodies rising and falling in shared silence. His scar faded beneath thickening fur. Dust gathered on his coat and was brushed away by passing grass. The past weeks, once so fragile and uncertain, softened into something unspoken, absorbed into muscle and instinct. He became once more only a lion among lions, shaped by land and season. The ranger learned of his return through tracks and quiet observation. He recognized the pattern of movement, the renewed strength in the impressions left behind. He saw the pride one evening from far across the plain, clustered near a shallow depression where rainwater lingered. Among them, one young male stood briefly apart before settling into the group. Even from that distance the ranger knew. He lowered his binoculars slowly, letting the moment pass without trying to hold it. Visits to the riverbed became unnecessary. Water containers remained in storage. Equipment was cleaned and returned. Patrols shifted back to wider routes. The small fragile space that had once existed between human and animal dissolved naturally, as it was meant to. Intervention gave way to absence. Presence gave way to trust in what the land could now sustain on its own. The ranger did not return to the acacia trees. He carried their memory quietly without needing to revisit it. Seasons turned. Grass thickened in places and vanished in others. Herds migrated and returned. Storms carved new patterns into the sand. Somewhere within that vast motion, the lion grew into his place, his days filled with movement, hunger, rest, and survival. Nothing marked him as different. Nothing needed to. Yet for a time, compassion had crossed an invisible boundary. It had moved through silence, patience, and restraint. It had asked for nothing in return. And it had been accepted not through understanding but through endurance. On some evenings, when wind moved gently across open ground and the sky softened into deepening color, the ranger would pause in his work and look toward the plains. He did not search for any single shape. He listened instead to distant movement, to grass whispering, to life continuing in countless small ways. And in that wide, breathing landscape, memory lingered like fading light, quiet, unclaimed, carried forward by wind, by earth, and by the slow, steady rhythm of a world that had briefly allowed two distant paths to touch.